Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
If you're a fan of comic books and comic book conventions, Daytona Beach Comic Con needs to be on your list of must attend events. It's a show that actually focuses on comic books. Imagine that! This year's event is happening on Saturday, September the 6th, and Sunday, September the 7th. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. There's a new convention in town, and it's sure to be mega fun without the mega expense. Comics, toys, collectibles, pop culture. ShadowCon, Saturday, February 1st, 2025, in Orlando, Florida. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. If you find yourself in the Orlando area, and let's be honest, doesn't everyone come to Orlando for the House of Mouse? Head over to Coliseum of Comics to get your comic book fix. Be sure to check out their location on East Colonial Drive, where they carry a wide selection of independent comics, including Silverline books. Stop by and don't forget to tell them Silverline sent you. Hey, if you're an independent comic creator looking to get your comic printed, look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our comics and do a fantastic job. They can even print special edition covers. When you reach out to them, be sure to tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, internets. Welcome to That Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK, joined as always by Jose Fuentes.
Hello.
And Ron Fortier.
Howdy, everybody.
And David Rios.
Hello.
And tonight we'll be talking about when to make wordless panels. And the kind of the significance about what the panel will have on the comic, what to go with it, your intentions, as well as the execution of it. So making sure that from start to finish, your impact and your execution align with what the reader actually, receives and what you intend as a creative team. This is something of a hot button issue at Silverline as we're talking about the pre-show, given that some of our members here at Silverline are diehard fans on every panel needs words, while as others are give the panels more space to breathe in general. And some people would prefer to have much more sparse dialogue. So it kind of creates some heated debate about the correct way to make a comic. Spoiler alert, there is no correct way. It's whatever way you succeed in making a comic. But
Exactly.
but the sort of the different schools of thought to have when going into making a comic. So first, I'll pass that around to everyone here to get your thoughts on having wordless panels, whether or not you're a fan, what you think the frequency there should be, if there is like such a thing as like a preferred frequency, or do you find them more or less impactful based on what's happening in the comic around it? Jose,
We're
why don't
being
you start?
wordless panels. Just so you know,
Yeah.
we're being wordless panels.
Yes.
I like the idea of not having words on a panel. Like, I'll be honest. For one, I guess from an artistic point of view, it kind of lets the artist have full length of the panel. When you're doing sequential art, you have to keep in the back of your head, like leaving room for dialogue. You can't, make the figure like too close. I mean, you can, but you have to always leave room for dialogue. If you don't, then whatever pretty drawings you put on there are going to get covered. That may or may not make someone happy.
Sure.
So the idea of a panel not having any words or even like a whole book or a whole page not having any words, you know what I mean? That allows the art to kind of breathe a little bit, like give it a little room to like take a full breath of air and then back into the story again.
Oh, boy.
I wonder sometimes if, especially newer writers have a real understanding of the power of the words, all right, of wordage in a comic, in a panel, in a caption, or in a word balloon or whatever. And there's this tendency, I think, sometimes to not understand how visual a media comics really are, all right? And like it or not, the minute you create something that goes into that visual media that's not an image, you're putting up some kind of an obstruction, whether it's there to help the image or adversely, it could slow it down or conflict with the image. So the whole concept of words joining art and becoming a comic book, all right, is that really fine, delicate line. And I mean, I love this topic, this particular topic, because way back when, years ago, and you've probably heard of it if you have never seen it, but many, many moons ago, Marvel writer Larry Hama, when doing G.I. Joe, one day out of the blue, must have convinced the head honchos at Marvel that he wanted to do an entire 24-page comic book without a single word in it. Okay? And he did it. He did a silent issue of G.I. Joe. And he made it work. Okay? It's all visual, panel to panel, page to page. And I mean, if you've got a 7-year-old age of reasoning intellect, you got that story without any words. Now, what I find ironic with all that is somebody ultimately made a comment to the effect to Larry about, well, that was pretty easy. All you had to do was draw. No, because that was just the opposite of that. It was the total opposite of that. Larry had to write a detailed script and know exactly what he was going to put in each of those panels, much more so than if he had the luxury of adding words or this or that to direct his readership, all right? Now, I never forgot that. I had a copy of that issue. I thought it was mind-boggling. I loved the concept of the exercise. And recently, somebody just told me the other day that I guess Matt Wagner tried that with Grendel and did an issue of Grendel in a similar fashion. All right. So now, about 2 years ago at a local community college here in Colorado, for about 2 years, I taught a class on how to write comics, an 8-week course, right? And somewhere in that 8 weeks, in every course I taught, I literally gave the assignment to my students to go home and write an 8-page script without any dialogue or captions. What I wanted to get back from them was the understanding of what comics are all about, right down to the basics. Because when they realized they were going to literally write a script, all right, detailing images, but they couldn't use their words to do that, all right, it really pulled it out of them a great deal.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to have a few local artists who would help me out. Because basically, I'd take my students' scripts and give them to these artists, and they would actually illustrate it for them. So again, it's one of those things where I think there is a time to use words and a time not to use words.
Right.
And the more you work as a comic book scripter, the more you understand the sensitivities of this media and how both those creative elements have to work together. Then even in writing a script, you can I just finished writing a scene this afternoon where I had a few people literally having this emotional argument between the two of them, all right, to the point where it heats up and almost blows up, to the point where one of the characters has just heard enough, so upsetting from the other character, that the last panel of the page is he turns around and walks out towards the exit door. And I knew right there and then, I'd done what I wanted with them back and forth and their dialogue and their arguing and debating. And so I leave it silent. He can't tell the other guy anything else. The other guy's intransible, and so is he. And so if I'd have put a word there or whatever, it would have been like tipping the scale, right? I respect my readers. I don't have to dump them over the head and repeat the same things over and over and over again. Learning economy as a scriptwriter, there was the argument. These two guys, old friends, are now not going to be friends because of this argument of what they've done before. This guy turns around and just walks out, and it's a silent panel. Words would have gummed it up. It wouldn't have been as effective.
Speaking of that book,
Nice.
Way to go, Dave.
this happens to be part of the Kickstarter. They did a new cover and all that. But
All right.
to perfectly illustrate that point, I want to bring one page up that was just fantastic. This page here on the left. So you have Storm Shadow throwing the sword, and then Snake Eyes catching it and chucking it above her.
Yeah.
Yep.
No words on any of it. Gets a point across. The just the focus of the eyes on Storm Shadow, where he's surprised. Fantastic stuff.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff.
Right, and I'm pretty sure if you've never read, the G.I. Joe comic, if you know comics or like you're interested in comics, you know about that book. You know what I mean? You know about that story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was Snake Eyes story, so
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I know everybody loves Snake Eyes.
Right.
yeah.
Kind of in a similar vein, something that I thought was also interesting following that same vein of it really testament to how well a writer knows their property and how they can execute a story without having any sort of words or dialogue involved with it. In 2001, kind of following on the footsteps of that G.I. Joe book, we had Joe Casey, who at the time was writing Uncanny X-Men, did one of the Enough Said stories with Banshee.
Mm.
And if you're not familiar with Enough Said, it is, I can't remember if 2001 was the first one, and then they did another run in 2020. But Joe Casey, Chris Claremont, and a couple others did Enough Said stories around at the same time. And it is all wordless, 22 pages. And X-Men 401 is one that I always go to because it is the emotional story of what it's like to be Banshee at a time when his powers were in and out of control. And so, of course, his whole thing is that when he screams, he has raw destructive power. So it was just a great moment of you don't see a character's mouth move until the last panel when Banshee is finally in a position to attack the big bad. And because he's been, and but you see kind of the emotional torment that he goes through as he sees that after the X-Men have lost and he's walking through essentially the bad guy's compound. And it's if you haven't picked it up, I recommend it.
Well, that was also the concept of, another great medium was the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Hush episode.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Very well done. They definitely carried their point across there, and just made when they did introduce talking and sound such a huge impact. It all kind of went together very well.
Well, I get a kick out of the fact that when talkies first came in, as crude as they were, silent films had been around for such a long time and been established. It was amazing how people thought, oh, well, talkies, just a gimmick, won't last.
Right.
Yeah, gone. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, heaven forbid, cinema actors had to actually start learning lines of dialogue. All right. Up until then, just put it on a cue card, every 10 minutes or whatever, and have the card pop up on the screen. So there you go.
Was it Singing in the Rain? Addressed that. Like they that whole movie was about transitioning between silent movies to talkies and whatnot. It's funny, just like when they were filming the silent movie, they're like, "Yeah, I don't really like you. Stop coming around me. Like, I don't want to have to talk to you." And then the dial, like what's supposed to be said, like typed out and whatnot, is totally different than what he's actually saying. Like, I just like that concept was hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, the whole concept, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, that's a comedy, but at the same time, it was also a tragedy for a lot of actors who have good voices. All right, you had the whole key element of Singing in the Rain is that their lead actress has this squeaky voice and she can't sing words, and she's got to sing this song, so they get Debbie Reynolds and they're going to dub Debbie Reynolds in her place. But there were quite a few actors in Hollywood who basically lost their careers when talkies came in because they simply didn't have the voice. So it's a sad thing, but the whole point it's like I hear people say all the time, the only constant in life is change.
Changing.
Things change all the time. They change all the time, and we're seeing that happen right now in comics. I mean, comics are changing. I mean, drastically. With I think the age of the independence, which was what I see as of like the last 5 or 6 years. I think independence and the market's opening up so much with smaller companies, on-demand printing, desktop publishing, all this kind of stuff. Okay, is Kickstarter funding campaigns. We're seeing this independent revolution really taking off now, and I think it's absolutely great. I think it's opening up the field to hundreds of more creators out there, and hopefully we'll be seeing all kinds of different comics that we've never seen before. Never mind, the same stuff that we constantly do. But again, hey, if you're going to work in the field, any kind of field that you want to get into, be it you want to be an actor or you want to work in the comic field, then hey, my advice to you is learn the ABCs of that medium. Right? If you're going to be an artist, hey, get some art classes under your belt. All right. I mean, I think Dave and Jose would be the first to tell you guys, you don't become an artist by just copying what you see in Marvel or DC comic books. All right. I mean, that's a mimicry. It's not going to take you too far, but learn the skills. If you want to be a comic book writer, then be a writer. Take all the writing. I mean, I took such bizarre classes in high school and college because I wanted to be a writer. I mean, from everything from, I don't know, medieval Gothic literature to Irish poetry.
Yeah.
All right. If it's about storytelling, then I wanted to know it inside out.
Right.
All right. And hopefully one day incorporate it in my love of comics and how I write and how I script. And that takes us right back to, our theme for tonight. A good writer gets a sense of pacing, of drama, and knowing when to back off with the words. All right. You learn an economy of words And again, I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again as ever. If you're out there writing a comic script and, you do a first draft, but by all means, don't stop there. Go back over it a second time, a third time. Why? Get your little red pen and start cutting out words. How many words do you really need to tell this sentence? All right. And don't be repetitive. Get your point across. Say what you have to say. There are times when you're going to need a few more word balloons. Okay. But again, you have to be critical. You have to be self-critical. Is it really necessary?
Yep.
And if you can live with that, then fine. Move on. All right. But I've yet to write a script that I didn't go back through and not lose at least 25 to 30% of what I'd written originally.
I mean, it's the same for artwork. I go through three drafts before. I mean, it's funny as it sounds, but I rough it out on digitally, then I clean up my roughs, and then I print it out and then pencil it. You know what I mean? Still rough, and then I go over again and do all the detail and line weight and whatnot. It's a process doing pencils as well. Like the only thing I don't do that is inks, but even inks, like I'll do a thin line, you know what I mean, so I can figure out where I want my line weights, you know what I mean, to coincide with the lighting and everything.
Right. I mean, kind of the point is one of the best classes I took for comic writing was actually a screenwriting class. Because kind of to Ron's point there is you learn the importance of taking a beat on screen, which is not something you can do in novels in a sense if you know how to do cutaways in text. But the idea is you're doing the same thing, right? In the novel, you'll cut away to describe the scene in the back to allow a beat to happen between characters, like or exchanges happening. In comics, you then pass it off to the artist to show that change, that cutaway, and that beat where a moment of change, impact, or significance is happening, where as people are talking, things are going to go back and forth, but usually you're going to have a moment where someone has a switch flip in them and they're not going to respond in that moment. So you're going to have a cut, or you're going to have a beat, or someone's going to drop a bombshell that forces everyone to recalibrate and will change the trajectory of that story. And you're going to have a beat where people take a second to breathe and take in what's happening.
Right.
And it's the same for the reader. The reader will need that beat at the same time as the characters to understand the gravity of the situation. And that's a moment where you have a panel without words and you allow the artist to focus on the expression of the moment.
Right. Now, what you bring up, Tim, and I think it's a great analogy because it's only, I think, over the years, because I think most comic book people love movies. Mm-hmm. I think we get that connection with storytelling, visual storytelling. And over the years, you come to realize if you have an opportunity and expose yourself to watching other than just American films, especially European films, all right, where what you're talking about, you see a lot. Most European directors don't have a frenetic pacing that American directors have. All right. And you see a scene end where in an American film, that beat would be done and you'd be off to the next scene. Blake, boom. All right. Where all of a sudden, though, in the European film, the character sits back and the character just comes in on him. And then there's this extra beat of like looking at his face, of watching it and, just staying there. Like the director in the storyteller is no rush to take you away from that. All right. How does this character react? Look at him, silently reacting. Yeah. And there's that big difference between European films and American films. And I think it's a great deal to do with the culture, with the fact that Europeans, their history, their cultures are thousands of years old. Mm-hmm. Where we're relatively in that ballpark of the world community, still the young kid on the block. Yeah. And we tend to do things, especially storytelling, beat. Gotta tell it. Gotta get it out.
Yeah. I think kind of like a really good modern example that is popular enough that I think most people have probably seen the clip, if not on the show, on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. But in Game of Thrones and end of season 1, There's a moment where Arya Stark is disguising herself as a water maid in the Lannister camp, right? She's in while Tywin Lannister is the Hand of the King, and so she is disguised herself and she is in like the thick of the enemy, right? And they have this moment where Tywin is holding the council and he's grilling her because he wants to make a point of this northern girl who is serving him because he doesn't know exactly who she is. And he asks her to describe her brother, and she says all stuff like, they say he rides wolf in a battle, that he can turn into wolf, that he cannot be killed. Tywin, of course, chuckles at this, and he kind of has like the villain moment of like, well, of course to say that about him, but do you think he can be killed? And then she says, no, my lord, anyone can be killed. At that moment, you see Tywin's face just drop. And there's a moment where you just see him stare at her before he grunts out, fetch some water. And it's at that moment where you have this wordless break in the scene where there's a beat where you realize that she said something that cut his character. And again, at a point where you'll find this in a lot of things that are European or have European influence, where they take time to allow the actors to really act on their micro expressions. Or in the case of like Euro comics, I love Euro comics, of course. Wolf Hunter is illustrated like one, where they will say like, all right, we're going to pull away and let the artists show what just happened for these characters internally.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, right? And I mean, we've talked about westerns here in the past too, and I'm a cowboy junkie. I love western movies. And that movie to me was like eye-opening, a revelation, you know? I mean, because you're literally, every time he'd get, you know, Morricone would get to doing a gunfight scene, right? A shootout, he would like take forever, right? They'd play the music, right? Sergio Leone's music would just, you know, just basically looking at a guy's face for like 2 minutes. And then looking at the other guy's face for like 2 minutes. And you're sitting there in the movie theater going, well, somebody going to draw here? But he's in no rush. He's in absolutely no rush. The music is just playing and getting heavier and heavier. And he builds up all this suspense. And you don't wonder if, like, you know, is this guy a comic book fan? Because the way he set his characters, the way he shoots, the compositions, there's a lot of comic book work, American comic book work in Italian Westerns, which is really, really easy to see if you've been reading comic books all your life, that they just turned around and said, hey, we can do this. We can bring this to the screen. And they did.
Right.
All right.
Like to zoom in every time, like do a gunfight, they always zoom into the face, zoom into the eyes.
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, it's a strange thing that we talk about, because now I'm working with Andrea Bermuda, the Italian artist, on Beyond the Stars, right? And the thing I noticed about Andrea's work, which I find absolutely unique, is that Andrea doesn't like, we're going the opposite now here, okay? Andrea doesn't like character close-ups. I can write panel scenes where I want them to focus in on one character or two, and when the final pages come in, they're the two characters, but full body shots with all the other characters around it, right? It's like he's like, no, I can't just do that. I got to incorporate the whole scene in this panel, all right? And I'm not going to try to change him. I mean, that's not my direction. I just want, he's telling the scene. But it's like his concept is seeing this much broader picture all the time. And he never loses focus of that. Even when telling, the story that we're telling about those specific characters, he incorporates everything. And he does it flawlessly. So I have absolutely no complaints on whatsoever.
Yeah, I like seeing the pages, that the roughs and whatnot that he does when he posts them on the social medias.
Oh yeah, hey, I mean, at the end, it's like you're having this mind and you're telling this saga, this interstellar, story, and man, that's what he's drawing. That's exactly what he's drawing. I mean, every page, every spaceship, every scene, the stars, all that good stuff. It's just this like mega science fiction movie happening in his head.
Absolutely.
Go for it. Hallelujah.
Well, we got some examples that Ron and I both brought, and so I figured we'll kind of take a minute to talk about it from our artist's perspective, and then we'll let the illustrator and colorist talk about what they see that makes that textless panel or where those panels stand out, or what they think they would do when approaching something similar. So I'm going to do a little preview here of Wolf Hunter issue 2 if you have already placed your order or want to head on over to the Silverline storefront when it becomes available. But I have a moment where our protagonist, Captain Willard, is in the process of interviewing the suspects on the train, and one of them is Darcy Blevins, who was the Romani character that I talked about earlier a couple weeks ago. And he leads with a question of just very minimal wording, but your husband, is he? And it's one of those questions that you don't need to finish if you know someone's background. At the Romani were also victims of the Holocaust, so it's something that if he's asking about it but doesn't want to necessarily hit on a sore subject, right? And I'm assuming the readers are also smart people. I'm not going to talk down to my readers. And we have this moment where we have a cutaway to Darcy changing her expression, changing her pose, her body language changes drastically, and Alexander Raga and Martin Bertonen did a really good job just making this entire interaction very painterly, I felt like. And then she comes back with a very a sincere response about her husband being okay, but she's thinking about the rest of essentially the Romani people spread across Europe at that moment. Without going into so many words, but just the layers of silence, right? We have a actual fully silent panel, but also moments of emotional silence where characters are afraid to talk about subjects because that make it too emotionally real at the moment. And so that was something that I felt like we were all on the same page with, about hitting on what essentially is one of the most terrifying times to be alive in recent history, and to be someone whose family culture was in the center of it, but also is now in a place that is almost just as hostile to live in. There's a whole bunch of read about Romani history in England in World War II. It's a weird it's a weird subject, but I felt like this is a great moment to take a moment to have emotional honesty with the subject matter of the story, as well as to allow for characters to have an honest exchange, as well as develop an understanding in a moment of silence.
It works. It works really well, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's what we've been talking about. All right, it takes a beat, which is really, really nice, and the composition works extremely well with it. Totally.
Yeah. And I'll probably let Dave hit on some of the coloring techniques he might do, since this is all done by the colors. But also we kind of have this natural highlighting around here, almost creating a haloing effect, where we have that the classic gradient transition that you normally do in painting, but very well focused in the panel. And so, Dave, if you're coloring, do you, if you're given a silent panel, will you work gradients or work colors in a way that will help elevate the scene or draw focus in a way that you feel like is appropriate?
Yeah, definitely. I was looking at that scene, and what I found interesting about that panel that you're doing is not only is it a gradient, but it's purposefully off center. Mm-hmm. The highlight is above the head, or right focused on the top of the head, which is, I don't know if that's the way that he designed it. look that way visually, or if he put that in design. But I thought it was kind of interesting. So yeah, I definitely definitely do try to put things in on how I feel that they can strengthen the picture and all that. So that's that's basically I'm playing around with something that Ron had done, but I haven't asked Ron.
Let me talk about that, Dave, because
I never got your permission to play around with it.
No, you're fine. But I want to explain how that page, that strip came about, and I think all of you will get a kick out of it. I'm doing some research one night on the PC, right? And I'm a Civil War buff. I'm a history buff, anyways. All right. But I read this article about the fact that during the Civil War, all right, one of the things that a lot of people didn't know was those soldiers on either side, the Union or the Confederacy, who were with artillery battalions, all right, who were like basically in all these big battles, Antietam and Gettysburg, Shiloh, whatever, firing cannon shot, hours on end, bang, 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 bang. Really didn't know a whole lot about protecting their hearing. So that one of the tragedies of that war is after 4 or 5 years of the Civil War, a lot of these guys come home with either partial deafness or being completely deaf because of the war. And so I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about it. And one day I get this email from this foreign artist, Madero, who's like, "Hey, Ron," he says, "I'm a big fan of your work." And he says, "I'm trying to go through all the, writers that I've enjoyed over the years and want to work with them." He says, "Is there any chance you could give me an 8-page script?" And this is along about, within a week or so, having read this fact about, all these Civil War veterans being deaf, being made deaf because of the war. And then it dawned on me and I said, wow, wonder if I could do a story where basically, from his perspective, the deaf gunfighter. And so I write this little 8-pager called The Silent Gun. And the story basically lays out, and I didn't want to dump 8 pages on these guys, but the idea in the story is you open up on this little western town, people walking around doing their thing, and then in walk these 4 bandits in the center of town. And Darryl does such a great job illustrating everything. And right off the bat, as a reader, you'll get that there's no captions and there's no dialogue. This is silent storytelling. And so they ride into town and immediately start harassing people on the boardwalks outside the stores. And some guy tries to protect his wife and gets shot. We see the gun blast go off, the guy falls. The sheriff comes out of his office, starts running across the street, and 2 of the other outlaws shoot the sheriff. Again, just guns blasting. Some of the outlaws then go into the saloon with the guy's wife that they caught because they're going to have some fun and get drunk and whatever. In the saloon is our hero. And he gets up and basically walks in the middle of the room and says something, he just yells to the outlaws. They turn around and everybody goes to their gun and he kills the 2 in the saloon. She's left crying. He comes outside, kills the other 2, and he's basically killed all the bad guys. Turns around, walks over and gets on his horse, which is hitched outside the saloon, climbs up into the saddle, starts to turn around, and one of the local kids looks up at him. He looks down at the kid and reaches over and gives him a little card. And that's the only letters in the whole story. And that little card is Deaf War Veteran. And he rides home. That's my silent story, all right?
Yeah.
Because the whole story is from his perspective. So if you were to film this thing, that's exactly the way you'd film it. You'd film it in total silence. Everybody acting and talking and blah, 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 but you wouldn't hear the sounds, you wouldn't hear the voices, you wouldn't hear the gunshots. Just that whole drama. And the point I was trying to get across, and I forgot, the first page of the story does show a Civil War battle and artillery cannons firing like crazy. And that's that first page. And I did that on purpose to set you up so that later, after you read the story or look at the story, you can go back and go, oh yeah, war veteran. Okay, and then you remember that all those cannons firing off, and you get what I was driving at.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, in the transition to that, like I said, I've just been playing around with it, but I was playing around with coloring your page.
Ooh.
Again, I didn't get your permission, so do I have your permission to
Yes, you do, sir.
show?
Yes, you do.
Better to ask for forgiveness, right? Better to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
100%.
Unless it's to my wife.
Like I said, this was after job number one, and after taking the trash out and everything. So it's been like a couple hours on this. But let me go ahead and share this because we talked before about color palettes and what we would do in the westerns. More muted is the direction I chose here.
Right.
But it's still in progress. But let me go ahead and share this.
Yes, Dave. Share.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I like that a lot. Nice.
So playing around some stuff, this is how I would color this scene. So you got a lot here in the face area. You got it covered up. You got daylight coming from above. So I put some of the harder lines in here to cast so that the top of his head is in shadow. This is the kind of similar to what you had in the other panel, in Wolf Hunter. It's the same thing of let's focus on, the guy riding off into it's still day, but kind of almost a sunset feeling. There's a little bit of yellows and stuff like that. But I did try to go through and utilize a very muted color palette and all that. And what I found really interesting here is there's some stuff that I like to do that I was kind of looking to do. I didn't have time yet to do, but with some of the line work in here, I was looking at bringing in some of the line work here, and using that and bringing some of the greens in here. That's too way. Just real quick. Weird. But bringing out some of the greens for the grass and areas like that, and from some of the pencil work, because there's great pencil work here. It's very awesome. But some of the things I was kind of looking to play around with to bring in some of the lines and stuff in here, so, to kind of establish more of the ground and stuff like that. But like I said, I haven't got that far into it.
That is really, really cool. I really like that a lot.
But I tried to go through and put it in. I will end up toning some of the stuff down around the outside edges and stuff, because I do want to kind of focus on this and this panel, the note, things like that. So, yeah. But I saw it and I'm like, what can I throw together? Because we always talk about, what would I do in this situation? And that's kind of, me just kind of playing around for a couple hours.
Hey, this looks really, really nice. If you're ever interested in seeing the other pages, my friend, let me know. I'll gladly share them with you. I think Madero would flip out if he saw what you did.
Well, like I said, I still got some stuff to finish and and all
No,
that.
no.
But
Hey, look, I understand. All I'm saying is you're a gifted colorist, Dave. Okay, and it shows. And you just added an entire different element to the story itself, which I appreciate a great deal.
okay, but again, I apologize. I didn't, discuss it with you first. It's just, like I said, I kind of got inspired by the panel, and I'm like, what can we do that's kind of cool? And we've been talking about how we would color a lot of the Western panels.
Right,
like
definitely. Yeah, it's
so
there.
Oh yeah. That's basically my example.
I love the juxtaposition because I love what you did with the tones and everything else, and then you have that open sky, all right, which is like this, like almost like a breath of redemption at the end,
Yeah.
It's like really, really nice.
Absolutely.
That whole layer of different storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it would be cool, right? I think it would be cool that Ron, if you had, if this were like say a full comic instead of just like 8 pages, right? Yeah, most of it being like obviously from the gunman's point of view, but sometimes you have to do the other people's point of view, like the outlaws and whatnot. And if the coloring shifted, so it was muted like this, or when the gunman was from his point of view. But if we like say took it to where like I don't know, a gangster outlaw boss is having a conversation with his like lackeys and whatnot, the color becomes like normal saturation as opposed to like the muted stuff. And the muted, because that just plays off of like he has obviously he's either deaf, partially deaf, however it's worked out. But like even then, if he's partially deaf, he's hearing like almost like a whisper or you know what I mean, like it's something muffled. And that's kind of the feeling I got from the colors that Dave threw on there. Like from his point of view, everything, any sound that comes through is muffled. I think that is incorporated when doing the colors. That gave me that same sense that the colors were muffled as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Cool.
So yeah. Well, we have some time left. I'll pass it on to Jose. If you are doing a wordless comic like this, or if you're doing a wordless panel like what I saw Wolf Hunter, what are some considerations you're going to make when you go to illustrating a panel that doesn't have bubbles obstructing your art?
That's a valid question. I feel obviously I like the idea of like zooming into the face because, like I mentioned when Ron was talking about good, bad, and the ugly. They did when they did the showdown and whatnot. It was a lot of like zooming into this person's eyes, like in space, zooming into the next guy, zooming into the next guy. So that's a moment. You know what I mean? You were talking about beats. That's like the page from Wolf Hunter. I know I'm getting to my point, I promise. But that page of Wolf Hunter you did, where it's like the one panel was a silent panel. If you take it like musical measures, that's like a half. You know what I mean? Like was it a half rest, right? And so that timing, helps. So depending on how big, if I'm doing a half rest, if I'm doing a whole rest in regards to like panel layout, I would love to add bold lines, a little more detail to the faces. Not just because what you could do paneling like fairly going quickly. You make the characters look as best you can. You know what I mean, but for something like that, I would enhance like the detail I'm putting on, like I said, bolder lines, cleaner lines, a little more a focus on, like a shadow across the eye where normally I may not, and I just may just throw something real quick. You know what I mean? I would just, like to focus more. I don't know, make that a little more detail oriented. Just because then that's going to allow the reader, like he's flipping through the pages and he's reading it, it gets to that point where like it's like the look, right? You want to take a minute, I would anyway, to take a minute and stare at that panel for like a second. Like, oh wow, like that. There's a reason why it's different than the rest of them. Like I'm meant to hold on this for a moment before I move on to the next one. That's what I would do.
Definitely. Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting into our last 10 minutes here. So do we have any final thoughts on Wordless panels or Wordless comics?
Use them. I mean, use them sparingly unless you're planning on a whole silent book or a whole silent section.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just to go back to the opposite side of like our friend and colleague that we talked about before the start of the show, who basically despises silent panels. All right. One of his arguments, all right, is that wording increases the pacing of something. So in his debating this whole issue, he came out with this fact about, well, even when you're doing a fight scene with two characters knocking each other across an entire room, and maybe the fight goes to actually 2 pages of bang, bang, this person hitting that person, fighting another person, whatever. You should have some kind of words because if you just turn the page from reading and you don't read, all you're looking at is just fighting, you're more likely to just turn the page. You don't need to look at it that much longer. And you know what? I want to say bunk, okay? It's a visual media. And if you turn the page and you get a double page spread of 2 guys kicking the shit out of each other across, a room or a backyard or whatever, all right, and you've got a good artist who knows what he's doing, you're not just going to turn the page. You're going to pay attention to what's going on in the fight and who's getting the upper hand and, basically appreciate the visual for what it is. And I think writers shouldn't be afraid of letting the art tell a story in its own pace.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of like what we're saying, there's like, if I was, well, yeah, adding letters will increase the pacing of a story. You can, like we talked about in previous episodes, is everything comes down to pacing. You need to have moments to push in and pull back, where you need to drive up the tension, pull back, let breathing, let them up to breathe, and silent moments are the moment to pull back and to allow your pacing to be more dynamic and to create more emotional depth to the storyline, just in the way that it's received. Because we found that while reading will increase your pacing, a silent panel does actually slow down a reader. And like Jose said, you take, even if there's like, usually an artist is going to take more time to add to the panel, whereas where text would be in there now, instead it's almost like the additional line work or the additional rendering or detailing does the place of the letters.
Yep.
And you create a moment of push and pull. And also, like Jose said, is you don't want to constantly do silent panels if that's not your intention, because otherwise you end up creating stuttering in your pacing. And that's also
right.
an issue. Yeah, but
Right.
if you find a healthy balance of it, you have a push and pull that should help keep your reader engaged, both on a surface level as well as on a deeper level all the way through the story.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, the caveat is understand the media and have a balance. Mm-hmm. Get the balance, all right? Understand the balance. Tell your story. Know when you need to have characterization. Know when you need to have action sequences. Know when you can blend them. Know when you can set them apart. Those are all part of this whole concept of what, graphic literature is all about. And if you're lucky and blessed enough to work with an artist who understands that storytelling dynamics, all right, then you end up blending the words and the art. And you know when to use them and when not to use them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I also have to say that, it's going through and doing wordless panels is something that really almost takes a veteran, because you really have to go through and know the proper way to tell the story before you jump on a whole new thing like this, because you have to have that skill that you've developed over time on proper storytelling, in standard. but so that you know what areas you can go through. I mean, anybody can, you can kind of jump on board the first time, but I think it's just going to be very difficult. And having gone through and putting a lot of your time into standard storytelling, I think is a big thing before you jump into a step. That's kind of my opinion. I'm not the writers, but that's kind of my opinion on it. So
yeah, I mean that's kind of like the thing with. For writers, it's kind of the same deal where you usually end up writing a lot of scripts or a lot of short stories before you even get one out. Kind of the same deal where if you're an illustrator, you probably have drawn a lot of Goku during class before you've actually gone through and done something commercial grade. But it's kind of the same deal where you have to take in as much as you put out. So be constantly reading or watching stories, and when you and try to be really thoughtful or engaged when you do so, and understand what the writer's doing at this moment to make you feel this way. If you're reading a comic, what is the team doing in this moment to make you feel this way? So when you come across comics with silent panels and they really resonate, you really understand like what the placement is like and what the technique and execution is like.
Yep. So anyway,
yes.
Do this for 10, 20 years, and maybe you'll get the hang of it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I've only been doing it for 5.
Oh, and you'll always be learning too. The comic you write at the end of your career will probably be better than the comic you write at the beginning of your career, because you're constantly learning, you're constantly practicing.
The thing is, to me, the idea basically is to hope that I can still learn. Okay, even after how many years I've done it, all right, that I can still learn something new. I mean, I talked about teaching classes earlier, and when I first started that, when I, was asked to create the class, I was talking to a friend of mine who was a retired college professor, and I said, so I'm going to teach a class on writing comics. I says, any advice? And his answer to me was so, insightful. He said, keep yourself open to learn from them. Amen. And I did. All right. I taught the class 5 times, ended up with like about, 30 different students over those 5 classes. All of them learned how to write comic scripts. All right. We actually produced comic books and had them published. They got to see their work, published, all that good stuff. But there were things that they brought up during the classes, during the discussions, questions they asked me that I had never given specific attention to, even all the years I've been doing it, but not sitting back and going, okay, why am I doing this? Those kind of things. I mean, by the end of each course, I hope I was even a better writer thanks to them. So teaching is always a two-way street. It's always got to be a two-way street. That's the way it works.
Absolutely. Okay. And we have one kind of off-topic but still decent question. No, I'll say it's still decent. We have one off-topic but decent question in the chat here. And this is something that is very valid. What's your advice on writers trying to make their first official comic script? Because of any writing profession, comics probably get the least love in any sort of official classroom. They still, like we're saying, like the classroom is very important for understanding, but I very rarely do find courses that are designated for comic writing. So that's why we have shows like this, is so we can give advice when you're making your steps into making your first comic script. And the advice I would give is communicate with your illustrator, even if you don't necessarily know who that is in mind right now. Write out as much detail as you can in the panels and in the dialogue, and then once you talk, yes, because your illustrator may not necessarily know who you are, or what your taste is, or what your motif is, what you're going for. So the more you can kind of help give them direction in the script itself, they're going to be able to ask you more in-depth and more probing questions about what they want to do with things, and they're going to have less time just kind of going over what the vibe is.
So, right. My answer to that, if a little bit of advice, is when writing a comic script, okay, I mean, you block out the page, and so you say page 1. You work out in your own mind, your own imagination, how many panels you want to have on that page, all right? And by all means, please, 5, 6 panels. Don't go hog wild over panels. Keep in mind it's a visual media. Bottom line, it's a visual media, okay? Step number 2, whatever action you put in a panel, you can only put one action, okay? You can't write, the hero walks through the door, sees the girl across the room, and runs over and grabs her and hugs her. That's 4 panels, for Pete's sakes, okay? So another rule formula, 1 panel, 1 action. Decide what that's going to be. Now, writing the panel, you have 2 things you write, okay? First one is the exposition, what's happening in the panel, and that's for your artist. And going back to what Tim just said, you can make that exposition paragraph as long as you want, okay? If you're working with a guy you've never worked with or a girl you've never worked with, write an extensive, detailed exposition. Let them know everything that you want. They probably will never put everything, but give them an ability to edit out what they visually think, this is important, this is what we'll do, okay? That's where you can use all the words you want. Then, the next part of the panel, the word balloons and captions if you use them, and that's economy of words. Just say what you want to say. Remember, it's going to take up space over that art. Never forget that. And that's it. That's basic comic scripting.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's our show on Tuesday. We'll be back next week at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern on those dates. Next week, we might have a new campaign live, so we'll probably be talking about that as well as promoting it throughout the month. Yeah.
All right.
Be on lookout for that. Yes. Next week, we'll be talking about the elements of a great splash page.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh. Nice.
The splash page may be my favorite feature of comics because being a Magneto fanboy, we've gotten so many great splash pages of Magneto. So we'll be talking about how do you write a great splash page and what are the artistic considerations you need to make with a splash page. So
all right.
Be tuned in for that. But until that time,
here we go.
Sorry, I was trying alarm. Make my
guy Silverline.
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.